Hunter Biden is a huge criminal, and so is the whole Biden family. It's a big. If you think the Trump family is corrupt, the Biden family will put them to shame. It seems like. So they have this deal. They had this plea deal that the prosecutors had worked out with Hunter Biden, so that Hunter Biden would never have to go to jail for anything he's done. We've had whistleblower after whistleblower from the IRS come out and say, "Hey, this guy is a criminal." And so he was also he lied on a drug to get a gun. He committed a felony because he lied about his drug use to get a gun. That same gun he ended up, didn't he put it in a garbage can?
Yeah, he just left it somewhere.
Just left it, which is also illegal. You can't do that stuff.
Oh, leave that family alone.
So they've been doing. So he's a super duper, and of course you know he's a crackhead. Which there, but for the grace of God, go I. But the reason why that makes it horrible is because Joe Biden wanted to lock up every other person in the world who did crack for their lifetime, except his own kid. That's when he has compassion for the drug addict. So these people are horrible people. Well, I mean, Hunter and his father and the whole Biden family, they seem to be horrible criminals.
Maybe the CIA felt bad, for bringing crack into the country.
Maybe that was it, yeah.
And Hunter got a hold of it. They never intend that.
So he makes some plea deal. So they made a plea deal. I'll cut to this chase. They make this plea deal that he doesn't have to go to jail for anything. He gets a slap on the wrist.
He's a good kid.
And then they won't. And they also they're not going to prosecute him for anything else.
Yeah,
that's the deal. What kind of a deal do you get that you're not going to be prosecuted from other crimes? So the judge stopped it. The judge stopped it. The prosecutor, so the criminals from the Justice Department are in bed with the criminals from the Biden family, and they're coming up with a criminal solution to get Joe Biden's kid off this, out of jail. And the judge stopped it. The judge.
It's like Goodfellas. Remember in Goodfellas?
No.
Where young Henry Hill's in the court, and the judge,
and he smiles,
like smiling at the judge, and the judge gives him time off. It's like like the mob.
Tensions grew after a prosecutor said the federal investigation into the president's son is ongoing. After pressing both sides for details about the plea deal, U.S. District Judge Mary Ellen Norica adjourned the hearing so that the two sides could refine and clarify the agreement, under which Biden had planned to plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax offenses and likely avoid punishment for a felony gun charge. At the end of the tumultuous 3-hour hearing, Biden instead wound up pleading not guilty so the deal's off. That's why he pled not guilty, because he's not going to plead guilty if they're not going to give him immunity for the rest of his life. And the judge wasn't going to give him immunity for the rest of his life. The proposed deal between Biden and the Justice Department, the outline which was announced last month, isn't dead. But prosecutors and Biden's lawyers will now have to satisfy Norica's concerns about technical aspects of the deal and her own role in enforcing a so-called pretrial diversion agreement under which Biden would avoid prison time on the gun charge if he remains drug-free for 2 years and doesn't break any other laws. Well, he's not going to do that.
Oh, didn't they find cocaine in the White House?
There's already a bag of... If Norica ultimately approves the deal, Biden will be able to withdraw the not guilty pleas he entered on Wednesday. He would then replace them with guilty pleas so he could go back with the deal. The judge made clear that she viewed the proposed deal as outside the norm. What do you mean? Like she said to the prosecutor, the judge said, is there a precedent for you giving this kind of a sweet deal to anybody before? And you know what the prosecutor said? No.
We didn't go Trump,
There's
Russia?
no precedent. These agreements are not straightforward, and they contain some atypical provisions. Biden faces criminal charges for willfully failing to file or pay his income taxes from 2017 and 2018, and for owning a handgun in 2018, a time when he has admitted he was regularly using cocaine. Federal law prohibits drug users from possessing firearms. Biden's attorney and federal prosecutor, but this has nothing to do with all the millions of dollars in bribes. So this is just... Then there's the millions of dollars in bribes that the Hunter and Joe Biden arranged from Ukraine, from Burisma, from China.
He didn't want to register as a
foreign agent. That's in here. So Biden's attorneys and federal prosecutors, they reached a plea deal after a nearly 5-year investigation. But early in the hearing, it became clear that Norica, also a Trump appointee, found the deal concerning, describing some of the provisions as not standard and different from what I normally see. In the diversion agreement, however, the Justice Department also committed not to bring charges against Biden for actions related to the tax plea deal. What? The judge said she couldn't find another example of a diversion agreement so broad that it shielded the defendant from charges in a different case. Leo Wise, a prosecutor working for Weiss, told the judge he was also unaware of any such. So when the judge says to this guy, where do you get a precedent to do this? He goes, there isn't one. We're just fucking doing it. Because it's Joe Biden's kid and the media's on our side, so fuck you. Judge Norica also pressed prosecutors on the scope of their agreement to not bring further criminal charges against Hunter Biden. Wise said the agreement meant they wouldn't charge Biden with more serious crimes related to his 2017-2018 taxes, and they wouldn't charge him for the crimes related to the gun mentioned in the diversion agreement. The judge then asked Wise if the agreement precluded charges against Biden for violating the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is FARA. That's what you were talking about, and that's what they got Trump's former campaign manager on. They got him for not registering as a foreign agent, meaning you're doing business on the behalf of a foreign country with the United States government. You're supposed to register. Most people don't. So they use that as a selective enforcement, which is what they did to Trump's campaign manager. So Weiss said the agreement did not preclude such charges. So when the judge asked, hey, does this agreement mean you're not going to prosecute him on the FARA stuff? The prosecutor said, no, that's still in play. That he could. So when Biden hears that, he's like, well, F this deal. I want to be completely. So that's when he calls off the deal. Okay. So you follow? I hope you follow. But Biden's lawyer, Christopher Clark, then said he didn't agree with Wise's interpretation of the deal scope. Then there's no deal. So if we can't get him off on the FARA charges, there's no deal. That's what that is. So you want to hear Greg? Here's Glenn Greenwald. He'll talk a little bit about it.
Spoke with people who have knowledge of this case and who are present. The clearer this became to me. This is what happened. The special counsel, as I showed you, made these statements to the public about the very limited nature of the immunity deal, promising the public, oh, don't worry, it doesn't apply to any other prosecutions. It's still very possible that Hunter Biden will end up facing additional charges, might have to plead guilty to felony deals. This only applies in a very limited way to just this case.
So that's what the prosecutors were saying publicly, that no, this immunity deal only applies to this case. That's what they were telling the public. But when they went to court, they tried to get him immunity for anything ever. Okay.
And I always thought it was odd that Hunter Biden would plead guilty when the immunity was described as that limited. And I always was a little bit suspicious of whether that was really true, but I hadn't seen the documents, the plea agreement. And so the judge today looked at the plea agreement and she read it, and based on the words of the plea agreement, it bore very little resemblance to what the special prosecutors had told the public about the immunity. It wasn't limited at all as she read it. It looked to be a full-scale immunity that was bestowed on Hunter Biden, not just for this case, but for other charges as well. And she began interrogating the DOJ prosecutor, saying, well, you keep telling me this plea deal is limited, but I'm reading it and it doesn't look limited to me. It looks unlimited. And that was when, with that kind of pressure being brought to bear by the judge, with reporters in the room, after weeks of being accused by these IRS whistleblowers of being unusually and even kind of suspiciously generous to Hunter Biden, then they began insisting, no, Your Honor, this deal is very limited. The immunity is very limited. It doesn't apply to these kind of future cases. And she said, well, the deal I'm reading doesn't actually say that. It doesn't say what you're telling me. So at first it just became an issue of you need to rewrite this deal to make a lot clearer that the immunity you're giving to Hunter Biden really is as limited as you're purporting it to be. But then the other issue that she had was the way in which this plea deal was constructed was done in a very strange way, basically to make it so that there was no need for judicial approval. And that struck her as very odd, because that is something that is almost never done, to create a plea deal that way. And that's when she asked him, in your years as a prosecutor, is there any precedent for your constructing a plea deal that wouldn't require judicial approval? And that's when he said no. So that piqued her suspicions even more. And so once Hunter Biden's lawyers heard from the prosecutor their insistence that the immunity is very limited and does not apply to future cases, that it doesn't get them off the hook for other prosecutions, which of course is what you want when you're pleading guilty. You plead guilty because you want everything to be over with. You want everything to be done with. You wouldn't plead guilty knowing that there was a good possibility that you might just be back in court in a couple of months on something completely different charge, or somewhat related but different enough that they could still prosecute you for it. So when they heard, Hunter Biden's lawyers heard the DOJ prosecutors insisting that this was a very limited immunity, they said, well, if that's the case, we don't have a deal. We're not pleading guilty in exchange for this very limited immunity. So it seems very clear to me is that the DOJ prosecutors did in fact negotiate a sweeping, almost comprehensive immunity deal with Hunter Biden, and then tried to do it in a way that would not require judicial approval precisely to avoid what happened today, namely a judge sounding the alarm about how unusual this all was. And it was only once, because of these IRS whistleblowers coming forward and accusing these prosecutors of being unduly generous to Hunter Biden, with so much public attention lavished on their conduct, combined with now the judge doing that in front of a courtroom full of reporters, did the prosecutors then feel compelled to say, no, the immunity is not nearly as broad as they suggest. And that was when the deal unraveled. And it seems clear like that they did actually offer this kind of extraordinarily broad immunity for Hunter Biden. That was their intention, to do it without having the judge scrutinize it and then have nobody pay attention to it and have it just rubber stamped. That was clearly their expectation. And they got caught. Now, again, I do still think that they're going to go, these are all smart lawyers, they're shrewd, and they're going to rewrite the plea deal in a way that satisfies the public and the judge. Is going to kind of box her in and force her to accept this deal. It'll probably look as though the immunity is more limited than the current deal was structured to provide, but it'll in effect be a kind of informal guarantee to Hunter Biden and his lawyers that their chances of facing future prosecutions is very small. And eventually, I think this plea deal will be signed. But the fact that this all happened today is shining a lot more light on just how extreme the behavior has been on the part of the entire liberal establishment. And yes, that includes a special counsel appointed by President Trump. This idea that everybody ever appointed by President Trump answers directly to President Trump is preposterous. We know from all kinds of reporting that the Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI constantly operated to sabotage and undermine and subvert the president's desires. It's not as though everyone he appointed was some loyalist to President Trump. The entire liberal establishment has been working so hard from the start to protect Hunter Biden, including by manufacturing a lie that the evidence the New York Post used to report on his conduct was, quote, Russian disinformation. That's how desperate they were. They censored that reporting. They attacked journalists who investigated this. Everything we went through last night. And it now is culminating in this fact that this plea deal was done in a way that was remarkable from the judge's perspective. She intervened and refused to sign it, even though they were trying to do the deal in a way that didn't require her signature.
So there you go. And one more thing I want to show you. Here's a wild detail from the Hunter Biden court transcript, the infamous paragraph 15, which contained a stunning non-prosecution agreement for Hunter. It wasn't provided to the judge until immediately before the hearing.
Oh, that old move.
And the judge said, hey, I didn't get a copy of paragraph 15. Why? Because that's the paragraph that showed all their criminality and malfeasance, where they were trying to concoct a deal that shielded Hunter Biden from future prosecutions without the judicial review. And she was like, whoa. So that's the paragraph they kept out. Very interesting. Let me bring in Craig Posnick. Craig, what do you have to say? Anything to say about this?
Yeah, I got a lot to say. I was talking about this on Garland Nixon's show yesterday. You know, I asked myself 3 questions when I look at this. Number one, is this real? What's going in front of us? Is this just kabuki theater? Is this really a concerned judge? Is this really way over the top to the point where they couldn't give him this plea deal? Because we all know that, you know, no matter what, Hunter Biden is not going to spend one day in a federal prison whatsoever.
Thank
even
God.
though he's done the same thing that people are sitting in jail to this day for doing, you know, being on drugs with a gun, illegally, that he threw in the garbage pail. We understand that he's not going to spend a day in jail. So I'm saying to myself, is this real? Number two, the second thing I say is, how is the establishment of the mainstream media going to handle this? It seems, Jimmy, that they're using the same tactics of trying to separate Joe and Hunter. Well, that's Hunter Biden. That's the president's son. That's not Joe Biden whatsoever. But from what we know, whistleblowers now in the IRS and the new document that was released, that the big guy had to make this happen. Hunter Biden couldn't do these things, couldn't get these bribes, couldn't get these deals without daddy, without the big guy, and we know that. And number three is, what do they really want from this at the end? To me, this looks like this is something they're just going to use to hold over his head or as an excuse to manufacture consent to get Joe Biden out there when they're ready. When they want Joe Biden out and they want to move in somebody like Gavin Newsom, you know, whether it's Joe Biden stepping on a rainbow or slipping in the shower or having to leave office because his son's in too much trouble to spend time with his family, that's what I think this is about. I mean, this is $17 million in bribes in 3 countries, Ukraine, Romania, and China. That's what we know. 20 plus shell companies. That's what we know. What don't we know? So really, to tell you the truth, you know, I just feel like it's just more posturing going on, because even Gary Shipley, one of the IRS whistleblowers, said in his 15 years plus at the Bureau, this is the highest level, Jimmy, of fuckery he's even seen. This stuff makes Watergate look like a joke. So to me, I still think this is just something they're using as a distraction, and they're going to use it eventually when they want to exit Joe Biden stage left.
And they're going to use this instead of the $17 million that we know of in bribes from foreign countries to Joe Biden?
Maybe. You know, I mean, I don't know what they're going to use. For me,
is that what you're
just
saying?
Say, listen, I have to spend time with my family.
Okay.
You know?
Right. Okay. Well, one more last post from Glenn Greenwald. He says the corruption pervading the entire Hunter Biden prosecution, right up to and including the plea deal that fell upon the slightest judicial scrutiny, is genuinely shocking. But Democrats have been trained to believe anything involving the name Hunter Biden is trivial. And it isn't. It's unbelievable corruption. I can't wait till on Monday we're going to cover the bribery scandal, the phone calls, or he's sitting. I've got my father sitting here right next to me. He'd put his father on phone calls with the people bribing them in other countries on a speakerphone. We're going to cover all that. Do you know about that, Craig?
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot that was listed in FT 1023, which is this new document that was just released. And it talks about it. The fact is that I think it's pronounced Slovetsky, who was the founder of Burisma, had to give $5 million to Hunter and then $5 million to Dad as well. His dad knew the whole time that this was going on. We made the joke that, you know, it's $5 million if you're not a foreigner, but if you're a foreigner, it's going to cost you $10 million to bribe somebody in this country.
Do you think that really reflects on Joe Biden just because he raised a crackhead that takes bribes from other countries?
Yeah. Come see our live shows. We're going to be in Chicago, Rosemont, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, New York City, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Stamford, Toronto, Toledo, Detroit, St. Louis, and more. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets.